Good day, everyone. I'm happy to announce our guest speaker, who will be also presenting at the conference, who is joining us today at our pre-conference podcast series on product substance management and compliance. We have Eléonore Mullier of Steptoe. Eléonore, hello. Thanks for joining us. Eléonore, please tell us a little bit about yourself, your role in the organization, and about the firm itself, and what you will be speaking about, the topics of your presentation and what they will focus on.
Thank you, Georgie. It's a pleasure to be here, so thank you very much for having me. I'm a lawyer. I'm a partner at the law firm Steptoe & Johnson. I have been advising on EU chemicals regulation for about 12 years now. I'm a Belgian qualified lawyer, although I very much focus on EU regulation. I am based in the Brussels office of Steptoe & Johnson. So for those of you who may not know Steptoe, we are an international law firm present in all of the, let's say, regulatory capitals of the world, in Brussels for the European regulations in DC, but also the West Coast and Chicago in the US, and also in Asia with presence in Beijing and Hong Kong. And I am part of the Chemical and Life Sciences, which is a global group advising on all aspects of chemicals, life sciences, environmental law. And what do we do as lawyers in this field? Basically, we help clients with all of the legal aspects of these types of regulations. And that is from how do you comply with the regulations to how do you interpret the regulations, and where necessary, obviously, how to challenge those regulations. So that's me and Steptoe in a nutshell.
Thank you very much for the unfolded answer. Definitely, we will be happy to hear the experience of your company with working with the clients and experience that you had at the conference itself. Let's say the whole aim of this podcast is to raise awareness about the upcoming forum, which will be taking place 22nd and 23rd of April. You will be joining us as a presenter on 22nd of April, day one. Could you please elaborate a little bit what you will speak about, what will be the, let's say, topic of your presentation, what it will focus on?
Happy to, yes. So I'll be focusing on two categories of chemicals, of chemical substances, which, and that's the commonality between the two, currently benefit from certain exemptions under the REACH regulation, so the overarching general framework for regulation of chemicals in the EU. So the first group is intermediates. So intermediates are under REACH substances that are manufactured and used to be transformed into another substance through chemical synthesis. And that's very unique because, in fact, those substances have a short life cycle. They disappear upon transformation into another substance. So a new substance exists, the initial substance, the intermediate, disappears. So this is reflected by reduced obligations under REACH, reduced obligations to submit a registration dossier, so a more limited dossier may be submitted. And very importantly, also, intermediate substances are exempt from authorization, which is one of the key risk management measures under REACH. So that's the first category of chemicals that I'll cover on the day of the conference. And the second category is that of polymers. So in essence, under REACH, polymers are defined as being characterized by a sequence of monomeric units, which are reacted monomer substances. So it's actually linked to intermediates because polymers are normally generated through the transformation of intermediate substances, monomers, into polymers through polymerization. So those substances, polymers, have been exempt from registration altogether when REACH was first adopted in 2006. But the rule was that the monomer substances used to produce the polymer had to be registered with a full registration dossier, even if they were an intermediate. So those are the two categories I will be talking about at the conference.
Eleonore, we know that with the upcoming, let's say, amendments and the new Green Deal, we are going to be anticipating some changes. Could you give us a little information, because I believe you will be also speaking about the developments on this topic. So could you give us a little preview of what are the developments on those topics that you will be presenting on?
Yes, happy to, Georgie. So it's interesting because indeed, as you mentioned, the chemical strategy for sustainability was adopted last year in October of 2020. And as part of the chemicals strategy for sustainability, there will be a revision of REACH, which is planned. A lot of the discussion now is how far-reaching will be the revision of REACH. And actually, that's a difference between intermediates and polymers. So both categories of substances are currently subject to a lot of discussion, and there are ambitions by the EU authorities to restrict the scope of the current exemptions. But the situation is a little bit different. So if you look first at intermediates, intermediates, it's been a long saga, which is still ongoing today, which has involved a very important ruling by the EU Court of Justice in the so-called acrylamide case. And I was one of the lawyers litigating this case for industries, following this very closely for some years now. And there have been since last year discussions at Caracal, so the meetings of the competent authorities for REACH and CLP, surrounding the impact of this judgment on existing ECHA guidance. And currently, right now, the question is, will the Commission use the upcoming revision of REACH, which is planned as part of the strategy, in order to restrict the definition of intermediates? And this is quite important because, and I'll explain that more in my presentation on the day of the conference, this actually was not foreseen by the strategy. And it's more of an ambition to, let's say, perhaps take advantage of the REACH revision to pursue an agenda which is not that of the strategy. So that's for intermediates, and we can discuss more on the day of the conference. For polymers, it's different because for polymers, already when REACH was adopted in 2006, there was this review clause, it's Article 158, which expressly provided for the possibility for the Commission to propose to register polymers as important in the future. And work on that had started even before the chemical strategy for sustainability was published, which confirms, the strategy confirms that this should be considered. And there has been a lot of work ongoing, and I'll explain more at the conference, on how to go about registering polymers. It's a huge category, polymers, so potentially the impact on industry would be tremendous. And it also raises a lot of questions because of the specificity of polymers. And it's still, so the work on this is ongoing. There's a specific subgroup working just on that within Caracal. And there are a number of issues yet to be defined, such as, for example, just really the scope of the obligation. So for example, will it be that a company is able to show that the polymer it places on the EU market is of low concern and should not be registered? Or is it the opposite? Must it be shown that the polymer meets criteria which require its being registered, or perhaps even a combination of both.
Okay.
So this is a little bit, in a nutshell, where the two groups of substances are going and the link with the strategy. And, in fact, the commonality is really that on both sides, the existing derogations from REACH obligations are being tested, are being put under pressure. And this may lead to significant new obligations for industry, even when previously it was considered that obligations did not apply, they may apply in the future.
Eléonore, if I may ask, is it, for my understanding, is it that we are right now, let's say, anticipating that either the polymers that are of high concern will be regulated, but they, let's say, dissolve faster, or the polymers that might, let's say, the polymers that are resistant, they will be regulated, which might not be hazardous polymers? I mean, is this what we are speaking about right now when it comes to polymers?
This is very much part of the discussion right now. It's the first step really in the discussion is which polymers should be subject to registration and should go with the dossier. And you'll hear more at the conference, but in a sense, on the international scene, what has been done so far is mainly to rely on so-called PLC, polymers of low concern, and we love acronyms on the REACH. We always use a lot of acronyms. So with PLCs, what it means is that if you can show that the polymer is of low concern, you don't need to register it. And the concern that the Commission had expressed very, very early on is that potentially this is a very small group where you can show it's of low concern. So everything else, even if it's just unclear if or not it's low concern, would have to be registered by industry, which would be huge. Mm-hmm. So the Commission has initially started based on there's a consultancy report, which is the basis for the discussions, working with a different acronym, PRR, polymers requiring registration. And the idea there is to establish criteria, which when met would mean that the polymer, if it meets the criteria, for example, it's classified as acute toxicity, category 1, then it would have to be registered. But right now, the discussions are moving or appear to be moving towards perhaps a combination of both. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't necessarily need to do the whole analysis of if you meet the criteria, if you can show your PLC. Mm-hmm. So this is where we're moving towards perhaps, still very much open at this point. And a concern there is a little bit also the risk of divergence with how polymers, with those concepts that exist on the international scene, mm-hmm. to have stricter requirements apply in the EU compared to elsewhere in the US or Canada, for example.
Thank you for the answer, Eléonore. I have, due to the fact that the conferences that we organize are aimed to assist the industry and the industry players to embrace the regulations, to prepare. What would you, let's say, forecast in terms of the industries? Which industries will feel these changes? Which industries will feel that? Plenty of companies right now, they're working with formulas that are, so to say, endangered formulas, right? The formulas that will be regulated, for example, cosmetics industry. However, which industries do you think will benefit from listening to this, and which industries definitely have to, pay double of the attention to this upcoming, let's say, changes in the approach, and they will have to adapt.
Good question. So the impact of both changes are potentially very far-reaching for all levels of industry. And why? Because, well, if you look at intermediates, for example, they're used in many processes. I mean, there are very different kinds of intermediates used in a huge variety of processes. And what's important to bear in mind is that the impacts will not just be for the companies who place on the market the intermediates. Mm-hmm. Why? Because it's not just about registration, it's also about authorization. So authorization under REACH applies when you use a specific substance, not when you manufacture it or import it. So their downstream users potentially may feel the impact as well if the definition is restricted. So this is not just something that potentially would impact only manufacturers or importers of intermediates or of polymers, because REACH also has impacts on downstream users, even if they're not the initial industry that you think of, because registration is really about manufacturers and importers. So in this case, we're talking about groups of a huge number of substances, which would affect very, very varied types of industries and applications. If you look at some of the industries that have gone through the authorization process under REACH, it goes from aeronautics to paints to very different kinds of processes. So unfortunately, this is something that could have very far-reaching impacts, and I would expect that it would be relevant for all of the industry that comes into play with intermediates or polymers at any point of the supply chain.
So we should fasten our seatbelts. It will be an interesting ride.
Yes, and get involved, because none of this is yet set in stone. So I think that would be the key message for me for industry is this is happening now. You have an opportunity to be part of the discussion, to get your views across on how this should be changed, if it should be changed at all, because it's not over till it's over.
Yes, sure. Eléonore, thank you very much for finding time, for joining us as the guest, for giving a little preview of what we should anticipate at the conference. I wish you a great day, and to all of us, I wish you a very successful conference. Thank you very much.